This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply.
And welcome to I Don't Speak German, episode 91. Since you're hearing my voice before Jack's, except for in the pre-recorded intro, we do pre-record that in case you can't tell. Jack is not going to be joining us today, unfortunately, it being summer and COVID-19 being a thing even in 2021. Some of us have difficulties and issues and busyness that happens. Instead of Jack being here, you have to deal with my insubstantial and substandard intro. But I do have a couple of really amazing guests who do a podcast called the Christian Rightcast, who I believe were called out on Behind the Bastards just this day as we're recording this. So being called out on Behind the Bastards is how this podcast went from X to 10X listenership, so expect a similar response, by the way, hopefully. But I am joined by two people that I'm very happy to get to meet for the first time, have been an admirer and kind of mutual Twitter followers. I'm joined by Jeff Eaton and Christian Rawls, if I've gotten those names correct. I think Kristin, I think I might have said Christian, but Kristin Rawls.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
No, absolutely, and hopefully, I mean, I think in the kind of the back channels, not to reveal too much, there is a ton of where we kind of work in similar spaces, but often have like kind of we cover very different things, and so I think this will be hopefully the first of many collaborations.
Thank you.
So I think except I'm very disreputable, and they probably don't want to be seen with me in public. So this will be the last time. But
we were joking around that like the terrible people beat has a lot of overlaps, even if we're all working in different parts of it.
Right.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, I run into this. I mean, sorry not to get us off track immediately, but I do run into this often in terms of like we all kind of follow. Like I'm kind of very much like I followed like the Daily Shoah and like the Right Stuff people, like very much in depth. And so whenever there is like some person getting into that, they send me like a bunch of emails and like asking questions, and that's fine. I'm happy to like share all that. But then they start going like, and what can you tell me about QAnon? And it's like, I spend virtually zero time with QAnon. I know what it is, and I know kind of vaguely like it's a thing. Like I understand the general dynamics because you can't not do this and not understand it. But like in terms of actually being able to give you like a reasonable quote that you can use for some article, like I'm not that guy because like we do kind of have to hyper focus. So what
it's like being an etymologist. You're like, no, I'm sorry, I'm a spider guy. You need to go. You need to go talk to a tick person.
Right, exactly. It even gets like deeper than that, but yeah. So just to warm us up here, tell us a little bit about whoever wants to answer. Tell us a little bit about what the Christian Rightcast is and what you do. You two are both like ex-evangelical Christians.
Well, yeah, but from a very long time ago.
Right, sure.
Almost 2 decades ago. For both of us.
Yeah. Sure.
And so we haven't really been. We got out, and before this ex-evangelical movement kind of came about, and have not. We know some people that are involved in that, but we're kind of. I worked for a little while as a freelance journalist, and I focused on education, and that's how I kind of got into doing a little bit of reporting about the homeschooling movement,
Mm-hmm.
and in particular the Christian homeschooling movement. I knew some people on the fringes of that growing up, and so I sort of came to this with more expertise, like in Quiverful and in the Christian Reconstructionist movement.
Sure.
Um,
A lot of terms there that I think would be worthy of full episodes, right? But like, so
when we started brainstorming the podcast, like there was this. So will we have enough material? And my answer was, let's make a spreadsheet. Let's just cover the topics we think could work. And very quickly we're like, okay, so there's 9 columns and we've got
like
about
9,000 things.
Yeah, right. It's like I now have a conspiracy theory wall just for podcast topics.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
No, again, just for the chat, like, we started this podcast thinking, because Jack and I had kind of done some podcasts together about like media properties and stuff. And we got 200 people would listen. And that's like huge for, two random white dudes sitting and talking about a movie for an hour and a half. Right. That's a massive podcast by that standard. Right. And we thought and I had been I've been listening to the alt-right dipshits for years at that point. And I've been really trying to figure out how to talk about this. I really wanted to write a series of essays or a book or something and really try to figure out how to explain it. But every time I started writing, you get 2 paragraphs in and then realize I've just used 4 terms that I now have to explain. And then just figuring out how to talk about it, where to start, how to make it work. And I was having so much difficulty with that. And Jack said, "Hey, would it help you if we did a podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, let's start up a little podcast. We'll get 200 listeners. We'll do 10 episodes or so, and it'll help me to put my notes together for the more important project." And then it exploded. So it happens.
I saw a lot of overlap with this neo-fascist movement and some of the ideas they were taking from the Christian right. And I noticed that a lot of the reporting on the both on the Christian right and on neo-fascism is not really very well informed by the overlap. And Jeff and I know Jeff through Twitter. We had both spent years both reporting, but also doing very lengthy media deconstruction and criticism about things like the way that people seemed shocked that Amy Coney Barrett's little Catholic community preaches women's submission and things like that. That they that we so,
hold on, really? People still do that? Isn't it 2021? That seems like not a thing. Yeah, no. Clearly,
that people just tend to be kind of uninformed on the intricacies of these things, and
that's not even an intricacy. That's sweet
summer
that's
child.
The headline, right?
Yeah. That's something that's just the Wikipedia entry.
There's misogyny within sects of Catholicism. That seems
and in
breaking news
in the conservative charismatic movement that she's a part of is even more explicit. It's baked into the church, but the reactionary group that she's in is obviously so we wanted to kind of help people. We wanted to make a body of work that people who are not as familiar with these things could reference and use.
And I think Kristin and I talked a lot early on about what's the flavor of this podcast, in part because there's really a wave of ex-evangelical podcasts and writers and media that are doing some really great work, both from I guess kind of an expose standpoint, but also I guess a processing standpoint. What does it mean to stop being evangelical, and stuff like that. But I think, because both of us are maybe like pushing 2 decades out from our departure from like, the evangelical or evangelical adjacent church, it felt like, we had already spent a lot of time on that sort of processing and sorting out like, well, what does this mean for me? How do I find values? Where do I, how do I grapple with the world without that framework? And I think both of us had spent a lot of time thinking about like, okay, well, how did these groups that we remember, that we were a part of, and that via old friends, loved ones, family members, we still are like a degree or two separated from in a lot of instances.
Right.
How do they work? What, how are they both a part of our broader culture and the stuff that's going on? And how are they separate and different and a sort of, like a philosophical vanguard in certain ways? And I think, as Kristin said, a lot of the coverage of the religious right it usually has a very like one note quality. It's like, you get different cliches are brought out in different conversations without really taking a look at the nuances of like what groups are involved in these conversations and how are the, intersections of various clusters of ideology that make up the Christian right involved in current events or trends, like, those snake handlers or something like that. And it's like, I was always the person in, circles I ran in who would sort of like Kool-Aid man, and it's like, actually, snake handling is a very specific phenomenon in certain Pentecostal sects.
No, I was literally about to do that gag. So like, thank you for sparing me that. So, so let's go back to the predecessor question that doesn't even get into the meat of the thing we're actually going to talk about. All of this is preamble to the predecessor question. What is the Christian Rightcast then?
Jeff, you do the tagline.
Okay. It's basically a podcast where we explain and contextualize the personalities, the groups, and the ideologies that make up the Christian right.
And particularly the authoritarianism.
Right.
We think that it is crucial for understanding the political environment and the rise of fascism in this in the United States now.
And this is something that
even like even like the word evangelical as we've been using it, like there is a kind of like lowercase e evangelical kind of thing that like means a certain thing that we could explain to the audience, but then really like evangelicalism as a sort of a theological construct is different from the political angle that it has been kind of taken since the rise of the moral majority in the late 70s and early 80s, and particularly in the Reagan administration. And so when we talk about like being an ex-evangelical, we're really talking about being not a part of that like kind of social community political group, more so than like not being. I mean, like
it's not just a theological change.
So someone that I admire a lot is Fred Clark. He does the Slacktivist blog, right? And I've been reading him for a lot of years, and he will describe himself as a kind of lowercase e evangelical. Like he believes in the sort of like the theological mission of evangelicalism, but like absolutely opposes the kind of political wing of this. And like a lot of what I think you guys are trying to do is to unpack a lot of this language and unpack a lot of this and kind of explain it to people who didn't grow up in it or adjacent to it the way that I did. And like, I'm just going to say, like, I grew up in Alabama. I grew up around this stuff. I was kind of adjacent to that community. I didn't shop at Lifeway, but everybody I knew shopped at Lifeway, if you know what I mean,
I did, but not after high school. Maybe early college, but
we had Family Christian Bookstore, aka Zondervan.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, no, so I grew up very like much immersed in the culture, but not kind of in it. I don't know.
I had a body piercing saved my life t-shirt.
I didn't have any of those t-shirts, but literally like everyone at my middle school had them, right? Like it was yeah.
Well, there's like a way in which every church in the South is evangelical, and like my dad was a United Church of Christ pastor at a liberal church, but also had a charismatic background, and it was, my parents were pretty evangelical, and, and
again, a whole bunch of other terms that really need to be defined for the audience.
Oh, true. But sorry.
No, it's on. I follow, but like just to be clear, I know this problem very well. Just to be clear,
So he had
So the United Church of Christ, for instance, is very different than the Church of Christ.
Right.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like a liberal Calvinist liberal denomination. It's kind of what Congregationalists are now, and the Unitarian Universalist.
It's fine.
This is how we arrived at the conspiracy theory wall when we started the podcast.
I'm just really pointing this out just to acknowledge the depth of like stuff, the depth of research that like we haven't even. We're not even going to go into this, right? I did just want to. But is someone who can have this conversation with the two of you and who understands this, I find that, and as someone who is very conversant with far right bullshit, I learn things in every episode of the Christian Rightcast. So like, and I often you two go into stuff where I'm like, I had no idea. Like, you went into this place that is super important and super like amazing to get to see, which I had never heard of. So I just want to like the highest possible recommendation for the Christian Rightcast.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Kristin has talked about this, and I think I've alluded to it, but like, I forget there's the logical fallacy that got popular in like skeptic communities to refer to things as like the courtisans.
The courtisan's response, right? That was a Richard Dawkins thing. Yeah. Yeah.
It's basically
as a former new atheist, believe me.
Yep. It's that idea of like, you object to something that somebody says and they say, oh no, but actually I'm a West Coast post 1997, follower of such and such ideology. So your point is completely invalid. And it's very easy to like get into that incredibly thin splitting of hairs in, and but the flip side of that is to just treat this fairly diverse mix of very different little, sometimes mutually opposed ideologies that make up the Christian right as like some monolith. And I feel like, both extremes are sort of bad news because
but the Christian right is made up of all these very disparate groups that hate each other as much as they hate the rest of us, but have unified around a political program for the most part. Not totally. They would, once they get some of their main goals done, like outlawing abortion, they really diverge. And the type of extremism they get into, and the type of, and the ways in which they kind of they converge with the fascist right has a lot to do with the different flavors of theology they're around in.
So I think no further ado, I think we should probably actually like kind of talk a little bit about the thing that really kind of brought us here, and just put a whole bunch of pins on a pin board that's connected by yarn as like future episodes that we can kind of discuss together. Because believe me, I can tell you that there's another podcast that covers all this stuff, but the two people doing that podcast are here with me today. And, there's a ton of background there. And like, personally, I don't think you can really understand the alt-right without understanding it as in some ways a rejection of the sort of moral majority evangelical George W. Bush years era kind of political project. Although there are overlaps as well. But moving along from that, I think the thing that really kind of got me to really kind of push on, I'd like to have you on, is you coined this term in your most recent episode, the theological dark web. And
a little tongue in cheek, but I think we stand by it.
Once I heard it and then went back and started looking at this guy again, because I was just watching some of his videos today, and I'm like, nailed it. So
right, he debated Christopher Hitchens, and they're sort of the rationalist.
All right. Let's back up slightly here.
Okay.
We need to do the 5 paragraph paper version of this first before we get into this is the thing, like organization is always the hardest part of an IDSG prep episode, and
you're right. We just went through all this, but we realized you're right.
So I'm gonna recommend, we'll put the link in the show notes to the most recent episode of the Christian Rightcast, although you should listen to every episode because they're all amazing. But let's who are we talking about, and why is he important?
Yeah, we're talking about Doug Wilson, and he is but to explain him, I need to go back a little bit and talk about the kind of ideological framework he's using. Doug Wilson is a guy who comes from the Christian Reconstructionist school of thought, which was kind of started by this guy in the 60s, 70s, 80s named Rusas John Rushdoony, who was an Armenian immigrant whose family escaped the Armenian genocide, and who, as a result, had a very, very understandably paranoid understanding of state power, and his project was really far-right libertarianism, an economic system that he got from the Austrian School of Economics, again, far-right libertarianism,
right,
and informed by a very conservative Calvinist Christian theology, which he believed that all of life, society, government, culture needed to be reconstructed to come in line with biblical law as he understood it, and by that he meant Old Testament law, and also his interpretation of the New Testament, but so meaning they often are they're sort of most famous for he wanted the execution of gay people, women who had sex outside of marriage,
disobedient children.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, isn't this just the reasonable conclusion you reach just by observing the world? Come on. I think I don't think any of these things.
I mean, we've mentioned on that episode that in a lot of ways he's one of those very specific kinds of people who they start with a premise and they have just decided that they will follow it to what they believe are its logical conclusions, and if they arrive somewhere monstrous, well, then the world just needs to be more monstrous.
I actually tend to, sorry, not to derail again, I apologize, Kristin, but I actually tend to feel like people have opinions about people they want to shut the fuck up, and then work backwards based on whatever mechanism they need to reach that conclusion. I kind of think that's how a lot of fascists are made, and I don't disagree that there's a spectrum there of where you start, where you end, and which direction it goes. But I think I think it's at least plausible that Rushdoony just really didn't like certain things happening, and found
I agree. He would say in interviews that he didn't like those things, but that the God's law requires it, so he
right. Well, and then that's how you save face for the liberal media, of course.
I'm required to hate this.
So
I'm sorry, it's right there in black and white. It's in the Bible. It just says it just says Chelsea Manning is evil. Like clearly, it's right there. It's in Kings, I think. Or something.
So I just want to get this out.
Please. Sorry, I've interrupted. Please go ahead.
He started the Christian homeschooling movement, but he also hoped, and this is kind of based on the kind of eschatology, like the beliefs about the end times that he had. He didn't believe in like a rapture. He called that fairy tale nonsense. You can kind of see the dark web sensibilities shaping up with him. He would study works of classical Western thought and underline them with a ruler. He had 40,000 texts in his personal library, and he would like kind of try to reconstruct them according to biblical law. He thought what he was doing was creating a full system through which that's kind of like Immanuel Kant's moral ethics, but a Christian version. But he also drew on a lot of like racist ideas. He drew from the Confederate Southern Presbyterian theologian R.L. Dabney, who was a personal chaplain to Stonewall Jackson. And
we covered a little bit of this back in the Southern Nationalist episode, way back when. That's kind of the one time I really touched on Rushdoony. I think Dabney came up, but certainly you kind of hear a lot of this. I'm hoping I can do sort of a follow up to that and get into a little bit more detail. So sometime in the future, because that's very much I kind of brushed over a lot of that kind of background, stuff. But anyway, just to highlight, there is an episode where we did touch on some of this kind of back in the deep recesses, the deep stratigraphy of the IDSG podcast.
So basically now Douglas Wilson is this guy who he has kind of by Christian Reconstructionist term, he kind of has a mega church, about 1,000 or 2,000 members in Idaho. He has started his own Christian Reconstructionist denomination, the Communion of Reformed Evangelicals, and he's very famous for writing this pamphlet with the former board member of the League of the South, Stephen Wilkins. It's called Southern Slavery as It Was, and it's just a full-throated defense of Southern slavery.
Spoilers. This is not actually as it was.
Right.
Again, just to put a pin on, we could do a whole episode just reading through and digging out all the bullshit in this thing. Published in 1996, deep connections to the League of the South. Again, kind of goes back to the Southern Nationalist episode that we did. You see a lot of the same kind of language feed into certain segments of what was at the time the alt-right, although they've kind of separated the kind of neo-Confederate, overtly racist right.
But he has supporters more in the mainstream evangelical world, like Mark Driscoll, the former pastor of the Acts 29, and John Piper. These are conservatives, but they're not thought of as neo-Confederates. Doug Wilson describes himself as a paleo-Confederate.
What if I could be a paleo-conservative, but even more aggressive?
Exactly. He has a master's degree in philosophy, so of course he has a certain he's taken on this kind of rationalist, very familiar way of speaking, and he'll and that really reminded us when we were listening to him and preparing for our episode on him, of the way that people in the intellectual dark web will throw out some monstrous idea and be like, well, if you really think about it rationally, there is some science behind the race science, or there is, why do Black people have lower IQs? And acting like it's perfectly reasonable and rational to throw out these things, and then but in a calm and sort of disarming way, that
and then to frame it as anyone who would fault them for having this discussion, quote unquote, is just not able to engage in this world of thought and ideas that we find so important, as he sits and sips a whiskey thoughtfully and chuckles,
Yeah.
Right.
And I found just like rewatching some, or kind of like, I was just like, in my preparation for this episode was inviting the two of you on, and then having watched like a couple of his videos, and then I was just sitting here like eating dinner and like watching, like just clicking around on the like Canon Press YouTube page, and it's just, again, you find like it is like, it's so fun for us, right? It's so fun to find like this new like thing that you just like, this is a 6-minute video and I could spend an hour unpacking.
It's like playing Where's Waldo with like existential horror.
Yeah, very much. It's like you just click on it and go like, well, yeah, no, that's awful. And here's the thing that's buried in that they don't even, that the two people on screen just agree on. Because of course they do. And if I were young and impressionable and didn't understand this stuff, or if I just didn't have a conversant like with what's kind of buried underneath, it's very easy to kind of go along with if you're kind of willing to accept the premises. And they do kind of, in a lot of these videos, it is kind of like, well, look, we're talking from the Bible. And if you believe in the Bible and you believe in this kind of thing, then you should, just kind of come along with us. And we're making a reasonable argument and we're willing to listen to objections, but like we clearly have a certain level of knowledge, we clearly have a certain level of familiarity with in terms of talking about this stuff. And I think what's important, we're not like preaching like kind of fire and brimstone. We're not doing the kind of the big stereotypical thing of like the big megachurch preachers kind of going out there and being very like kind of emotive or being incredibly, or kind of like saying the quiet part out loud about gay people and all that sort of thing. It's like, it's buried in there, but it's very much like meant to be something like, look, I'm a rational adult. I'm coming to this as someone kind of seeking answers. I'm someone really kind of like wanting to engage as a reasonable adult with like reasonable people who might have, some kind of help for me in the problems of my life. And I think that it's important that so many of these videos are kind of about like, here's how you deal with some particular problem in your home life. And the answer to that problem is always like, well, the woman should just listen to the man and the man needs to be able to lead. But it's always phrased as like, this is an obligation on the man to take charge and to be, but to be more responsible. And it is like, I don't know, there's this very like,
it's the gender version of the white man's burden concept.
Right. Once you hit that like theological dark web term, it literally just like I have this light bulb that came up, and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what's happening here. So
they very much think of themselves as the intellectuals of the Christian right. They think that, and they tend to be. They think of the more emotive and expressive styles of evangelicalism as kind of embarrassing, and they're but they're really doing it right. They're the ones who are able to be disinterested and calm, and so
well, and like Daniel, you mentioned the stereotype of like the megachurch preacher, or like the guy, the angry preacher on the street corner, and I think
of course this gets racialized in certain ways as well, and I want us to both ping that and also like just not lean into it in a way, there is a kind of racialized in certain ways that like the stereotypical like megachurch preacher that like many people will have in their heads is an African American vision of that preacher, right? So again, not that I think you were going there, but I just wanted to highlight it here because
and it's you've just referenced one of the unexplored clusters in our giant pins and yarns on the wall map of the Christian right too, because there's even like long deep divides in the Christian Pentecostal right between like African American and white like branches of that faith, of that subset,
and breaks it, that denominational schisms and things like that. Yeah. So, but I would say their sensibility is racialized in a way that is I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, racist, explicitly racist. That they think, well, we're being, the calm and reasonable ones, and right.
When you write something in 1996 that's like, actually slavery was a moral good, like I don't think you have to be too hard.
Yeah,
like
we could pick that apart bit by bit. But just step back and
yeah, we did know it was racist, but I didn't think of the way they talk about the rest of the Christian right as, I just so
yeah, I was just under the hood here. Maybe Jack cuts this out. One of the episode 90s that I prepped in the mini episode 90s. If you listen to episode 90, you know that I was planning that for a long time, and it got reformed about 5 times. I was originally planning to do an episode about the Southern Baptist Convention and its relationship to the alt-right and the sort of like the internal dynamics there. And like the deeper I dug into that, the more I realized like this is a Christian Rightcast episode. I should really I almost just DM'd you, Kristin, and was like, are you planning to do something on this? Because if you are, I can just, leave. I can just not do this anymore. But although maybe that's future collaboration, because James Edwards is someone I've been following for a long time, and he has this highly contentious relationship with the SBC.
Well, so one thing is some of the current overlap with the alt-right has to do with the Christian Reconstructionist wing of the Southern Baptist Convention, right? Which is like, so Baptists were originally Calvinists, and then they stopped being Calvinists. And in the 20th century, the Christian Reconstruction, they adopt a very significant wing of them adopted the Christian Reconstructionist perspective, in which that and also the teachings of people like Dabney and so I think that is a significant, but not the only place where they overlap. So
I think one of the things that's very interesting about that too is that you have the explicit connections there. I mean, they may not be like written on the, church bulletin kinds of things, but like if you look at the topics and the themes and the ideologies and the personalities that are, involved and connected to each other, that connection is really explicit in certain areas. But even in a lot of other parts of the Christian right, which I think is sort of the theme we return to a lot on the podcast, like the psychological and philosophical building blocks of what we would think of as like an alt-right mindset or like a neo-fascist authoritarian mindset are really deeply baked into a lot of like Christian, modern Christian fundamentalism, which is, again, not to say, yes, modern Christian fundamentalists are Nazis. That's not what I'm saying, but rather like a bunch of the building blocks that cause those kinds of groups to be able to rise to power, even in cultures that may not immediately be on board with every one of the bullet points, are all there in the Christian right in spades.
And if you listen to a lot of the kind of modern day white nationalists, quote unquote, the alt-right, however we want to define it, complicated terminology, I think our listeners kind of understand some of that nuance there. But if you listen into a lot of them kind of talking about like how to convert their relatives or how to convert their friends and family, a lot of them, either come out of or, are kind of, they come out of and are opposed to the kind of, Christian right, the kind of Southern Baptist style, kind of neoconservative, moral majority type. And so much of this is a word that we said in the back channel that, like, again, a whole galaxy of episodes, but like around the concept of Israel. Like, it is very difficult for open anti-Semites to get evangelical Christians to hate Jews in the way that they need them to hate Jews. And they whine about this incessantly. Like, this is a constant point of conversation, is like, how do I get my boomer dad who like really loves Rush Limbaugh and the church to hate Jews. Like, I just can't do it.
Oh boy.
He hates Jews in a completely different way, you see, you know,
Yeah,
like
that's
they don't put it that way. They put it in, like,
he
they
subscribes
don't
to a
see...
slightly different flavor of fetishized anti-Semitism. I want angry anti-Semitism.
That is why Rushdoony is such an important figure here, because he did not have this Christian Zionist perspective, and shared a lot of the, Nazi views about Jewish people. And that's why he's taken up by groups like League of the South and Identity Dixie now. And that's why he's so important in the neo-fascist
and like to touch briefly on this, like, I think we first got into this sort of pool in like the world of the Christian right, talking about like apocalyptic themes, which the Christian relationship to anti-Semitism is like that's a whole, like, graduate level.
Let's talk about 2,000 years. Let's talk about 2,000 years.
But like the way that the particular like American evangelical relationship to the concept of Israel as a nation state and Jewish people, it really grows out of actually like a school that Rushdoony and Doug Wilson were a part of, like that sort of millennialist rapture view that had this timeline where Israel becoming a nation state again was one of these tick marks on God's plan for the end of the world. And thus, like, Israel becoming a nation and the Jewish people having a home again, et cetera, was like this evidence that we were right in this grand civilization scale way that no one could have ever expected. And the relationship that fundamentalist evangelicalism has to Israel is it's a very strange one. You have like, corn-fed, blonde Nebraska, fundamentalist kids like giving their 6 kids like Jewish names and like and saying, oh, it's because we really love Jesus. It's like it without understanding that it's, I mean, to a degree, it's like a co-option of Jewish identity as a way of claiming authenticity in true Christianity. It's a very weird and tangled kind of relationship. And a lot of it ultimately comes down to this belief that like, and when the end times really play out, all of the good Jews will convert to Christianity anyways. So like, that's the punchline to how much evangelicalism really loves, Judaism. It's because they think they'll eventually get with the program and be us. But like that relationship is very, very strange. And like that, that tension you mentioned, of open alt-right anti-Semites wanting to, convert their, evangelical fundamentalist family. It's like that's, I would say it's probably a lot closer to what I've seen growing more and more in like the increasing alt-right directions of like open alt-right directions of Christian fundamentalism is that weird, like, only Israel really gets why it's so necessary to have an ethno-state.
Yeah.
They're right about that like weird,
and
anti-Semitism by one level of indirection thing,
and some of them see like the crimes of like the state of Israel, right? Like the war crimes committed against the Palestinians, etc., and say like, why not us?
It's like what an inspiration,
right? And this gets into the kind of like screw your optics, I'm going in, thing of Robert Bowers, the Pittsburgh massacre shooter, just believed that he was seeing the synagogue that was working directly to import brown people into his society, and that this was something that is like a project of organized Judaism, like not as a like kind of a religious value, but as a like an ethnic, like that Jewish people are just programmed by their biology and by their culture to do this. And so this gets into like the darkest of dark places, which is why we should probably move off this topic unless you have more things to say. But like this is like again an extended conversation that we could definitely have about the tension between these two very hard right communities. And in fact, again, communities of communities, like galaxies of communities that are kind of working on the same thing, but in very different ways, and that have a push-pull relationship with each other, and that work within our politics currently. Like the thing that the alt-right, again, kind of that larger alt-right is trying to do is to make it okay to be an anti-Semite by diminishing the importance of the Christian right to a certain degree.
And I think one of the really troubling themes for me over the past probably number of years has been a growing receptivity in different parts of the Christian right via a sort of fetishized and reflexive defense of Israel as a nation state being like our icon of God's true power, because he made all these prophecies come true again that no one thought could happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A growing defensiveness around the international condemnation of the nation state of Israel's war crimes against Palestinians has put a lot of Christians on the strange side of like forming complicated and nuanced arguments in favor of an ethno-state. And
that is really interesting. That is really interesting. And I have not seen that in so many ways. And again, we'll put another pen right there. We should definitely come back to that at some point.
I want to add to that we also see a lot of this convergence happening out of the Christian homeschooling movement, where there has for a long time been an overlap with militia movements, with sovereign citizen ideology, with the kinds of right-wing prepper movements and a lot of it does come out of homeschooling, where people tend to just get it, just kind of radicalize very quickly. I found out recently that Molly Conger outed someone that I grew up with, as who grew up in the Christian homeschooling movement, who was a cop, who was out. She found him fantasizing about murdering liberals and plotting to overthrow the government on January 6th. And so there is definitely a lot of this comes from like the heavily politicized Christian right. The influence of people like Alex Jones is where some of this starts. And we see there may be like frustration from groups like Adam Waffen or whatever, but we do see a lot of people making the leaps to becoming full-on fascist, having come out of this movement. And like there were some friends from the Duggar community who were spotted on January 6th. There really is a lot of convergence that we see. Like, so I don't think that they are as opposed as some of the atheist types may think.
I recently learned that there are a number of people, particularly within the atheist scene, who believe that the Unite the Right people chanting "Jews will not replace us" believed that was about a religious conflict, and
wow,
that to me is like the. Like, I don't understand how you like that's like note one about understanding what was happening at that time period, and really a key that I'm not doing my job properly, because if I was, everyone would understand that basic point at this point. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a subtweet there. I apologize. So I feel like we've gotten. I'm loving this conversation, by the way, and we can do that. I can do this all night, but I do feel like we should get back to Wilson and the theological dark web. One of the things that I noted, just kind of again clicking through on the YouTube page, was sort of the production value, right? And like you see, there's this kind of like the spare, like he's sitting, he's got a nice microphone, he's got his glass of whiskey, or he's got his kind of thing. He's got this neatly trimmed beard. He's kind of doing the thing, and they kind of like lean into their microphones and speak very softly and talk to each other. And they've got this like very nice lighting set up. And I mean, it's not like a fancy, like it's not like some crazy editing setup or whatever. But the three of us are podcasters. And
game recognizes game,
right? You understand like how what production looks like, right? At a certain point, even though we don't do video podcasting, but like there's certainly a difference between you look at kind of the bread tube community, and you understand like the amount of like I looked at like Destiny setup, like not a fan of Destiny, don't worry, but like I was looking into like he posted his like on Reddit, he posted like what it takes for him to do his live stream setup. It's like $20,000 worth of equipment.
Yeah.
And that's just to do like live streaming of video games on a, so you understand like the amount of money it takes to sort of make like a professional kind of YouTube production at this point, and
there's
also
a lot of money behind that, clearly.
And also a very careful, like media savvy understanding of what kind of image they are trying to project.
Right.
Like there's a very deliberate like cultivation and creation of like that academic thoughtful, relaxed academics just discussing the issues of the day vibe that like Kristin talked about, that like that's a set, that's a constructed image,
just asking questions. And
it reminded me of Brett and Heather's weird wooden room, and honestly like that set looks much better than Brett and Heather's weird wooden
room.
This is a little bit of a deep cut, but if anybody remembers Davis Arini, one of the guys who produced the Sarkeesian effect.
Do I remember Davis Arini?
That very distinctive like sit down, take a sip of whiskey and say, well, gentlemen, we're about to talk about the issues. That was the first thing I thought about when I saw Doug Wilson's videos. I was like, oh, but he had a budget to produce with.
90% of Western women are degenerate sluts.
Also, have I introduced you to the skull on my mantle?
We will definitely link to the H-Bomber Guy video, the 2014 H-Bomber Guy video on this topic at this point. Anyway,
but
can we talk a little bit about his son too? Because he's doing he's doing even more of a stealthy kind of thing. He's written these best-selling children's books. So I
have not looked into the son at all. I feel really bad about doing this because normally I like to be like the person bringing the heavy research.
Okay.
And
it's okay.
You got to be careful though, because last time we did that, we're like, oh, let's look at this video. And then like 45 minutes in, we're like, oh, okay, he also shields pedophiles. That's a plot twist we weren't expecting,
I generally spend like 6 months looking into someone before I even think about doing a podcast episode. So this is very much, I'm on my, this is my ramp up on this research. So anyway, Kristin, please tell me about his son.
All right. His son, N.D. Wilson, whose actual name is Nathan, I think. Professionally,
Indy, like Indiana Jones.
And initials N.D. I have that accent. But he's written a series of best-selling children's books called 100 Covers. There's also a YA series and a preschool series called Hello Ninja that is in its either third or fourth season on Netflix. He is really trying to take a lot of the ideology and kind of disarm kind of red pill children. The book 100 Covers, we read and talked about it a little bit. It was troubling, and it was like a children's invective against empathy.
Again, we could unpack you unpacked this on your previous episode. So I'm just going to tell people the difference between empathy and sympathy is a very clear thing in the Wilson mind. And we're not going to unpack that here, but you already did that work for us.
It's a trip.
He's so Wilson, his father, has developed a whole argument against the concept of empathy, and in the book, it's kind of like there's no human connection or empathy that ever happens. It's kind of like a boy gets to really come into his true self by going on adventures, and his parents are missing, but he didn't love them anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
I think you compared it to A Wrinkle in Time in your podcast episode, which is all about like the missing father and the children going, and like the need for empathy to defeat what, like, I think we could talk about charismatic and like how it's sort of the right-wing paranoia about communism. You know, I think there is some of that, there's a lot of that there, but like it's ultimately a book about like the love of a child for her father. And
what if someone wrote A Wrinkle in Time, but no one cared about each other at all? What if?
And so there's that, and like very sort of rigid gender roles in which the young boy is always going out to rescue these flighty women. But then this Hello Ninja thing is
I just want to say Hello Ninja, my old friend. Like that's just
it's really I mean, unsurprisingly, it's racist. It's extremely racist, and it's a show on Netflix.
Hold on, against like Asian people? Is that? Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh.
I
mean, the traditional plot twist is, wow, that's an anti-Semitic show about ninjas for preschoolers. But no, it's just mostly
just mostly anti-Asian. We started, or I don't know if you got to watch any, Jeff, but it's like,
I'm reading Christian romance novels for our next episode. I haven't watched Netflix.
I'm excited for this. I worked at a bookstore for a few years, and believe me, hold on, let me rephrase that. I worked in a bookstore in Alabama for a few years.
So you are familiar with the prairie romance section.
I am. I had to restock it regularly. So yes.
I had those recommended to me by friends, and I tried to read one, and I thought they were so boring I couldn't. But
at the end of the book, the really hot stuff is like she gets a peck on the cheek. It's it's the sort of thing. The Hallmark movies are practically X-rated in comparison.
Oh yeah. So it's just really overt anti-Asian racism. There's this Asian grandmother character who is very stereotypical and talks in this kind of offensive Asian-y American accent, but and is always saying stuff like, to be a wise ninja, to these one white child, one biracial child, to be a wise ninja, you have to take on the strength of the jaguar, and really just Orientalist tropes all over it. I think,
and not ironically, right? Like this is not subverted at all, right? Yeah,
no, not at all. It's just
so not quite to the level of like We Love You Long Time, but
it's definitely, especially right now. It's there's like a Chinese dragon character who's it's kind of like this like almost noble savage imagery, I think. And so N.D. Wilson is he's still a member in good standing at his dad's church. His wife has been interviewed in their local Idaho newspaper talking about how they've been persecuted for their faith in a allegedly liberal town. I think that they're college town voted like 50% for Hillary Clinton or something. So that's like that's a communist town for that, you know.
Right there.
They might as well be like Mao Zedong might as well be like running the place.
Because as someone who now knows some leftists, there's nothing communists love more than Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, so N.D. Wilson worries me because he's best-selling. He's just churning out constant content, very popular with secular children's audiences who I don't think are able to pick apart the some of the reactionary ideology in some of the things.
And the fact that like I've been a Netflix subscriber for, I mean, I used to just get the discs from Netflix. That's how long I've been using Netflix, right? Yeah. Like I've been a Netflix person forever. And honestly, I would cancel this if my wife watches a bunch of it. So, I hardly ever like sit down and watch like, oh, let's watch a bunch of Netflix. But the fact that like I've never heard of these things, and then like the fact that there's like 4 seasons of this on Netflix, and the fact that like the Man Rampant show, which what was kind of, I think that was on Netflix, or was that
no, that
Amazon.
was just
it is
that was
you
Amazon.
can buy it. Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon.
Anyway, sorry, that's a different thing. But the fact that like this is on Netflix, the fact that this is getting like mainstream, at least within this kind of like evangelical Christian subculture, and the fact that it's like completely like below the radar of sort of like cultural commentators, like because it is being kind of fed to, like you don't see like reviews in the Atlantic or whatever about this show.
No one seems to know it, and even though his books have been best-selling, his breakout book was 100 Cupboards, and that was a Kirkus starred review book. They have all been very big. I also don't really follow children's entertainment that much, but I feel like people who have kids.
My wife watches a lot of Disney Channel and stuff. Like my wife kind of likes the sort of like watching a lot of that kind of stuff, and I've not seen anything like show up in her feed. And that tells me I should ask her about it actually, but it tells me a lot about like kind of the way that the algorithms of the tech companies are sort of feeding this stuff into directions.
Oh, interesting.
Where it should go, right? And I feel like that's sort of a very much a theme that I didn't think we were going to kind of discover on this podcast. Like clearly the way that the tech industry interacts with this stuff is super important, but I thought it was kind of be kind of a buried lead. But like increasingly it becomes clear that like if you're not kind of understanding the way that the algorithms of the the big like 5 tech companies are creating these kind of like sub communities that can then like fester, then you're not kind of telling the full story. And that's something that
the best case scenario here is like 10 years from now, a bunch of like teenagers have like oh wow, Orson Scott Card is a huge homophobe experience about N.D. Wright and like the Reconstructionist ideology. But the worst case scenario is like there's this growing ecosystem of like children's literature that goes on a spectrum from, oh, it's a show about ninjas with Asian stereotypes, to like, oh wow, this is like really dark Reconstructionist alt history. Like it's very easy to like see that kind of ecosystem evolving out of this.
Well, like LaHaye and Jenkins sold like 60 million copies of their children's Left Behind series.
17 books in that series.
Fred Clark will not live long enough to finish that review, unfortunately. This
stuff is not, I want to be clear, this stuff is not getting that kind of scrutiny because it is not marketed as religious, or it doesn't mention God or Jesus. It's you see it's like I said, more stealthy. There's like a lot of like the morals are kind of like just you shouldn't really care very much about people. That's not a manly thing to do, and it's not something that a boy should really be doing. And yeah, I mean,
caring about people. What do you have, a vagina? Like,
yeah.
How much soy did you have? But like,
and
I think this is also where that like conceptual building block overlap that we were talking about, like it really comes into play, because like Doug Wilson, it's there, you know, in all of his like YouTube videos and the man rampant stuff, like half of it isn't even talking about Reconstructionism. It's just like him making a case that like caring about humans is a chump's move, and like God is against it and you shouldn't, like, but like so much of the stuff that's coming through thematically is really about like you know, male strength and domination is a positive ideal, and you know, male stoicism is a positive ideal, and you know, social inherent social hierarchy, and quote tribalism, which, you know, Rushdoony was big on as a, you know, way to appeal to
tribalism. Racism. Another word that there's a galaxy of like podcast episodes that we can.
And like
do,
Doug Wilson opens up his Man Rampant series with like a discussion about like you know, about how tribalism works, and it's like, okay, hold on, I've been down this path before. He's basically trying to figure out how to explain racism is good, but with like some new nouns.
Yeah, so it's like racism with more steps. That's what it is. And but like that kind of those building blocks that can feel like, if they're not looked at too closely, can feel just like traditionalism, or you know, like, oh, this feels old timey, and it's sort of a, you know, this, you know, golden tinged vision of what, you know, an old timey out in the Midwest, you know, life for a young boy looked like, and stuff like that. But like it's not just a soft selling of Reconstructionism. That's where like the distinctions between a lot of like, you know, neo-fascist, like traditionalist ideology of like return to the old ways, and, you know, my wife should stay home and be a trad wife and be, you know, a good caretaker for the home while I go out and like hunt mammoth or whatever. Like the language that's being used at that surface level engagement is like indistinguishable.
And in the book 100 Cupboards, every time a girl or a woman makes a decision to try and go help somebody, it's like it's seen as naive, and the woman always gets into horrible trouble and needs to be rescued by this boy who's like growing in his masculinity, becoming stronger and braver, or the new father figure he takes on. And it's normalizing this trad wife kind of,
the Wheatfield girl, ultimately.
Which brings us back to Christian prairie romances.
Exactly. It does. Jeanette Oak, right? Jeanette Oak. That's who was recommended to me. I was like, this is more boring than Little House on the Prairie. I cannot do this. The famous Christian.
This is not exactly one-handed reading, if you get my drift. And no need to respond to that. Is good, respectable people. It's fine. You're laughing because you don't understand the reference. I'm sure that's how this works. Anyway, we are over an hour at this point, and we can talk forever, and believe me, I hope we can do this again and kind of come back, and I can sit here like until I collapse in my chair talking about this stuff, I'm sure. But are there any kind of like closing thoughts? I know we kind of like danced around on a lot of stuff, but is there anything that we kind of hit on that you'd like to cover before we wrap up here?
I mean, I'll dive in and at least take a first stab. Like, I would say that like for people who are interested in and concerned about like the rise of the alt-right, like, I think, you know, the that frustration on behalf of the alt-right that it's so hard to sell the Christian, people we know on hating the Jews, darn it. Like at a surface level, there's a lot of opposition to like open antagonistic like neo-fascism amongst Christians, but on the Christian right, there's all of the building blocks are there, and the heavy lifting being done by personalities like Doug Wilson and a lot of his contemporaries, and it's they're selling their message, but they're also selling the core foundational building blocks of the alt-right movement and neo-fascism too, and that's really
well. And they share the same enemies, right? Like, I mean, that's ultimately kind of the key is like, who are your enemies? And
that's where you can see
the alt-right are going to say the Jews, and the kind of Christian nationalists are going to say the liberals or whatever, but they ultimately mean the kind of the same people.
And they may literally be meaning the same people when they say those things too.
Yeah, and that's why we keep seeing so much overlap and so many people that really go all in becoming fascists. It's easy if you sort of stay in the mainstream conservative evangelical movement to miss that, but the ones who go all in tend to kind of have been isolated from the larger society. A lot of it does happen in the Christian homeschooling movement, and a lot of those people are either they're getting out or they're becoming Nazis in a lot of cases.
And the Nazis are very happy to make that happen, and I'm trying to track that as it goes. So,
and I think it has to do with the fact that the ideologies are not that distinct from each other.
Ultimately it's a toggle switch, right? It's sorry, not to use like a computer metaphor, but it is like you change a few words around. Like there was this incident like years ago in which James Edwards, who does the Political Cesspool podcast, who was an explicit white nationalist, Southern nationalist, neo-Confederate, et cetera, he has had every white nationalist you've ever heard of who isn't like explicitly using the N-word with the hard R on every single sentence on his podcast over the course of the last 16 years or 17 years now. He wrote an article, he wrote like a blog post where he was like talking about like the Jews doing this, the Jews doing that, et cetera. And then like it sort of got like flagged, like people started talking about it, and they literally just did like a search and replace, and they replaced Jew with liberal. And then suddenly it was fine, and like it's that, and so there is this kind of the alt-right, the kind of remnants of the alt-right, the white nationalist right, the people that I follow when I wasn't doing mostly IDW stuff. I'm getting back into the Nazis very soon, I promise. But like what they're trying to do is to like convert liberal to Jew, right?
Right.
But ultimately, in order to make because they see that as like not far enough, but ultimately these people share the same ultimate political goals in many cases.
Right. Yeah, but that's what Alex Jones is doing with Globalist, and he has a very large evangelical audience. And he's given Nick Fuentes a show on his.
Believe me, I'm on top of that.
It does have there is more overlap than a lot of the evangelicals would like to admit. That's kind of why I thought we needed a podcast.
Yeah, so we should definitely do this again. Sorry, not trying to cut you off there, but tell us where we could tell my audience where they need to go to A, listen to you, and B, give you money.
We're on all the podcast listening apps. Christian Rightcast. Rightcast is one word.
There will be links in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Rightcast.substack.com is where you can give us money. We would really appreciate that. And if you want to talk to us, we're at CRightcast on Twitter, but we are more active on our individual Twitter pages. I'm at Kristin Rawls, KristinRawls, and Jeff is at Eaton, Eaton, much simpler than mine.
Because
And-
he shares a name with a manufacturing company. So
I am congratulated on my green power initiatives with some regularity.
Nice.
So that's where to find us.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate coming on. One thing that I thought when we were preparing the most recent episodes, that this is very familiar for based on what you've been covering recently on the
Right.
intellectual dark web. This all sounds
Yeah, one of the things you run into is that, like, the longer you follow these dipshits, the more you realize that it is kind of just this morass. And like, we, those of us doing this, really pride ourselves on kind of pulling apart the differences and understanding the nuances and really getting at the details of where these people disagree. But ultimately, it's a blob. They're all moving in the same direction.
This racism has nutty notes of perhaps Southern Reconstructionism.
We're the wanophiles. We're the wanophiles of racism. There's a little bit of Christian identity here, although I suspect a slight bit of Rushdoony as well. Oh, that sounds interesting. But
I think it's good to know it, because that's right. Otherwise it's hard to pick out.
You can't confront it without knowing kind of what's going on inside, and ultimately, I mean, one of the ways you combat it is to get them to fight each other, and like understanding the details of how they disagree, and letting journalists understand that. I have enormous respect for like ground level journalists, like kind of doing this, like, because they approach this and kind of go like, I have to file a story in 7 hours, and I need to understand the whole of the Christian right well enough to like.
I don't have time to figure out what was happening in 600 AD. So you're just going to have to,
I don't need to understand the details of like a Twitter feud that happened like 4 years ago about an episode of a podcast. I need someone to go to who will explain this to me, and that's kind of what that's kind of part of what we do here. So thank you both for coming on. You've already plugged your stuff.
Been a pleasure.
And hopefully, again, this has been a lot of fun for me. Hopefully I have not made an asshole of myself, and we can do this again sometime. So thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Loon the Band.